Hello, happy World Food Day. This is Alexis Baden-Mayer. I'm the political director for the Organic Consumers Association, and I have the great pleasure of being here with Rebecca Nelson. Rebecca Nelson is a professor at Cornell University. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Alexis.
Really great to meet you. So I understand you're a plant pathologist, but you're now working on circular economies, sustainable development, and your research focus at the moment is utilizing human urine as a fertilizer source.
That's correct.
So how did you make this path from plant pathology? What's the connection between plant pathology and recycling urine for fertilizer?
Well, I've always been interested in food security internationally, and was inspired during the years when I served as the scientific director for the McKnight Foundation's International Crop Research Program. I got inspired by some African farmers, actually. Not really. I mean, they were farmers first and foremost who turned to urine as a nutrient source for their crops. And I had been working on a plant health problem. These fungi that are attacking food crops, and they cause the accumulation of toxic compounds. And it came to me that human health depends on plant health. In the case when the fungus is producing something toxic like aflatoxin, the plant health depends on the soil health, and the soil health depends on having a way of maintaining soil health. So I was really inspired by these farmers in Niger who were using urine as a fertilizer, more or less out of lack of alternatives. But it seemed like a creative and obvious thing that, wait a second, the whole world is relying on synthetic fertilizers made from fossil fuels, and this can't continue. We can't continue to make our fertilizer, make reactive nitrogen from fossil fuels and dump the proceeds in the aquatic environment, or expect the environment to put up with it. And it just seemed like these farmers in Niger were out ahead of people. Now I came to realize as I got into it that lots of people are working on this around the world, but it just seemed like a sort of a very fundamental thing. It implicates absolutely everybody, and I thought, let me join that. And so, it's really about the health of the soil, the plants, the people, the planet. It sort of seems like a sort of basic thing that someone at my age can venture into, because the taboos just don't bother me anymore.
Well, that's great. Well, we're definitely at Organic Consumers Association. We're big supporters of this. We've got composting toilets, Clevis Multrum toilets at both of our farms in Minnesota and in Mexico. So I'm really excited to learn from a scientist about this, to learn more about this topic. You've put together a special World Food Day presentation. You want to take it away?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, so we'll see if it shows. There we go. Thank you. So Alexis, thanks again for this invitation. I'm really honored to be part of the People's Food Summit. I really appreciate the invitation. And let me get into it. So today I'd like to talk about circular economy in general, and then bionutrient circularity, talk about P and how we're using it, and why I think this is important. So the middle graph there shows sort of my lifetime in global cereal yields. So grain yield has doubled, tripled over my lifetime. These graphs tend to start in the year of my birth, 1961, and at least until this graph ends, things are going pretty well. You can see it might be flattening out there. But we've achieved this vast grain production feat by using fossil fuel derivatives and mined minerals, and this, of course, has been able to feed a lot of people, of course, but it's also caused a lot of problems in terms of pollution, loss of soil health, and other issues. So I'm sure this audience is well aware of those goods and bads of the linear economy based on synthetic fertilizers. We can see that of all these ways that we're violating the planet's safe boundaries, the green in the middle is the safe boundaries, and we exceed those in terms of these phosphorus and nitrogen nutrients are just completely out of whack. It's messing with genetic diversity, certainly messing with freshwater health. And novel entities means contaminants. I don't know why they use the obscure term there, but we're contaminating our environments at a awfully brisk rate. So we have to ask ourselves when we see that we're that far out of whack, how can we decouple human well-being from the depletion of our natural resources, our resources in general, and from the destruction of our environments? And how can we cherish that beautiful blue marble there? My answer to that question is by shifting from this take, make, waste linear economy to a circular economy. And usually when people think about circular economy, they distinguish between biological materials, shown there on the orange circle, and technical materials, because just the tricks that you can use are quite different if you're talking about recycling your cell phone versus recycling your apple. And so the principles of circular economy are design out waste, keep materials in circulation at their highest use, and regenerate nature. And I'm very moved by all of them, but particularly the idea of regenerating nature. And I recognize that it's really only the past couple of generations when things were quite as horrifically wasteful as they are now. My grandmother was a heck of a circular economist, and I hope my grandson will be an even better one. So in the past, we were less wasteful in other places than the United States, speaking as an American, where people are a lot less wasteful. A whole lot's going on to redesign systems, to a certain extent towards more circularity. And we can look at nature to inspire us as we develop this circular food system. That's because nature is good at this. Nutrients and carbon naturally cycle as organisms excrete and live and die. And so, one organism's waste is another's food, and bodies rapidly transition through this cycle. And so in the food system too, we grow food, and whether it's wasted or not, it can feed people, and the residuals can be used to feed animals. Wastables can be anaerobically digested to produce energy. It can be aerobically digested by microbes to produce compost, and that can go back into the soil to help us grow the next cycle of food. And so we can use that inspiration to figure out what to do with that. So this is just sort of a conventional vision of a food system going from pre-production through to farming and harvesting, then the intermediation phases of the supply chain through to consumption. And it doesn't make waste explicit here, but you see at the bottom waste coming from all stages of this food system. And so some of them is, we can sort of obviously understand waste when a delicious looking plate like that's going into the trash. But I just want to stretch us a little bit to see how, wasting land is also another form of, design out waste. Wasting food, just the extent of food loss and waste. I won't really go into the particulars, but, obviously if some 20 to 40% of food is wasted along the way. And then I think the sort of thinking at both ends, wasted land on the one end and wasted nutrients on the other, thinking about how we how we treat as pollutants our nutrients and carbon when they're perfectly good inputs into the foods, back into the food system. So, we're degrading land at, a shocking and sad clip, of course, salinization and just failing to keep our topsoils in line. In good shape, where, we can be inspired by the fact that rural and traditional production ecology is pretty darn circular. It may not be as efficient as we need it to be to support the populations that we have now, but we can look to traditional, for example, connecting crop and livestock systems in order to, again, keep things healthy. We've dislocated spatially in the United States animal production and plant production to such an extent that they don't benefit from the obvious circularity that is possible, and there are efforts being made to improve that again. And I think it's, again, a little bit of a stretch sometimes for people to understand how eating beef, which has got the biggest greenhouse gas cost of anything you could eat, is a waste of land also, because if you look at this, beef is at the top bar there, you can see it's got the highest greenhouse gas of anything, again, anything you put on your plate. A lot of that greenhouse gas comes from land use change. So we burn down the rainforest to produce more, whether it's more beef or more soybeans to feed those cows.
Yeah, it's mostly what they eat. Like if they were grass-fed, they would be part of the circular system, sending nutrients back into the soil.
Depending on how you got that grassland, right? If you got it by taking down the Amazon, yeah, I guess no, right? No, mainly. So yeah, so depending on whether or not if it's grass-fed on grassland, then that's fine, right? Again, there's a lot of former rainforest that's now degraded pasture, unfortunately. So then sort of, that's kind of like land use, how we're misusing and overusing land to various extents. And then throughout the agri-food value chain as conventionally viewed, from production, processing, retail, and food services to consumer, there's a tremendous amount that gets lost and wasted along the way with excruciating cost and greenhouse gases for what we wasted and what we have to produce to make up for what we've wasted and so on. What happens when the majority of it goes into the landfill, which it does. So we can do way better there. And then the last item here is, excreta, which we don't always see as being part of the food system, but that's me enjoying one of my fancy porta potties here. So I'm going to shift now to a focus on this issue of the circular bionutrient economy, because that's kind of my jam these days. So like I said, when we were chatting at the beginning, Alexis, this inspired by these farmers in Niger, I'm like, whoa, wait up. Plants breathe for us and they feed us, and we breathe for them. We breathe out CO2, they breathe out oxygen. They give us food in complex carbohydrates and proteins, and we can dish it back in the way it comes out of us is plant ready, no further transformation needed, very friendly for plants right there. And we call that circular bionutrient economy, and the world would be a better place if we practiced it, and we used to. So these are a couple of pictures from Europe and Asia, respectively, there, just showing farmers applying human excreta to their fields, which is how you would normally maintain soil fertility. But particularly with these extracted inputs, mined and manufactured fertilizers, and this sort of hygienist movement, there a pretty serious taboo has come down upon this practice, and so it's sort of somewhere between forgotten and forbidden, between these two impulses. So on the one hand, we can see synthetic fertilizer as being, I think, unequivocally and unchallengedly the #1 achievement of modern agriculture. By being able to make those fertilizers, that's how we jack those yields up 2-3x. And we can say it was, plant breeding, Norman Borlaug, but really, what was he doing? He was breeding plants that could put up with all that nutrients being put upon them. And then the public health establishment took a vote on what was their greatest all-time hit, and modern sanitation was the hands-down winner. Something along the lines of 99% of votes went to modern sanitation, because that's been this huge enabler of urban life. If you can flush and forget. So you can see sort of these two huge innovations of modernity, each sort of playing out now as a catastrophe as well as an achievement. And if we can bring them together, we can sort of proceed into the future. And we really need to do that by now. We're depleting our soils. The nutrients are going into the urban and aquatic environments at a brisk clip. We need to bring that carbon, and NPK here stands for, sorry, I should have said that earlier, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. I'm assuming people are aware of that, but if they're not, apologies. So NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, those are the big 3 nutrients that are present in a bag of fertilizer. And those are, big 3 nutrients that are present in our bodies and come out, with the food that we eat. So, we sort of know that the problem is on that our soil health is degrading and we're polluting our aquatic environments. There's harmful algal blooms everywhere that, where land meets sea or lake or river. But, until something happens like the sort of spike in fertilizer prices that came along when we had the conflict in Ukraine and whatnot. And then people start thinking, oh yeah, that, wait a second, what we can't access is urea, which is like the number one dry constituent of our own pee. Each person is peeing out, decent amount of NPK every year, every day, every whatever, several times a day. I mean, it adds up. A significant amount of nutrients taken in and given out. Where did it? And so again, I mentioned that I've been inspired by these farmers in Niger. We since I'm working off a PDF, you can't see the parts that we're hiding, but in the PowerPoint. But I had a picture of my friend and colleague Aminu Ali, who is my big inspiration for this, and he and his thousands of farmers that he worked with, they gradually they started small, and is urine a good fertilizer? We can see at least part of this here. In the foreground, we have a pearl millet field fertilized with urine, and behind not fertilized. And if you look at this design, it's very clear. The urine is working well for them. And they got after a few years, they got thousands of farmers were participating in the trial, and they could show consistent and statistically significant benefit from using urine, which was pretty obvious to them by that point. I'm just proud of them for getting a publication out about it. So they inspired me a lot. The French are big into it. I learned from the people in Niger, but the Europeans, the Scandinavians, the Chinese, I mean, plenty of people are onto this. So I just sort of like this French visualization of where the nutrients are. So their nutrients stacked up on this graph here, this bar graph, and the yellow is the nutrients in the proportion in pee versus the proportion in our poop. And you can see that for NPK, those major nutrients in a bag of fertilizer, it's almost all in the urine. And then for these magnesium, calcium, and iron, it's more in the poop. So I got to keep my eye on that. But, the yellow gold rush. So, you got a bunch of goods associated with pee. There's its fertilizer content again. Nutrients, water, it's got a low carbon footprint. It's cheap. It's available. You can reduce pollution if you use it. On the other hand, it's a heavier lift than I'm implying so far, right? People find it gross. It stinks. The pH can get pretty high. You're asking me to change what I do in my very private moments. Could be full of drug residues, pathogens, salt. So these are that enumerates right there our research agenda and trying to deal with it. And I just want to say that you can kind of construe your way of dealing with it either as sort of a personal home thing. You can use it in your garden, on your lawn. You can enhance your compost, if you've got a bunch of carbon in the form of your leaves and weeds and whatnot. And then I'll tell you about our grow as you go gardening method that we came up with. And then if you're able to operate at a more collective level, you can make sustainable farms and sports fields, in the city. You can make a dry fertilizer that you can send around the world. So that's kind of, again, sort of an array of products that we're aiming for there. So this is a European vision. Again, if you're good at that collective work, you can imagine taking the nutrients from the city and systematically bringing them through a processing process as the nutrients and carbon for the countryside, and then the countryside sends you back that food. So that's sort of the dream vision that we all subscribe to in this field. Whereas circular economy at the technical side, you got phones going to phone components. We think of food going to food components, and that's carbon and these nutrients. You can think that circular economy is always these nifty little circles, and it's not like that in real life. In real life, it's a tangled mess of a system, much more elaborate and kinky than a little circle. Because you don't send, a piece of asparagus back to the asparagus field or whatever. You're connecting things, and this cool graphic to the right here from a publication is about contaminants. Like everything you do has got a downside risk as well as an upside benefit. So it's a bit of a complex and gnarly thing in real life. And this is my sort of artless diagnostic network here showing, synthetic fertilizers come in, it goes crops, livestock, people. The crops and livestock contribute to deforestation. Everybody's got their residues, excreta, food waste. Those contribute collectively to greenhouse gases, which drives climate change, of course. The excreta from people, and where's my arrow from people to excreta? Oops, that needs to be there. Gives you nutrient pollution and harmful algal blooms. And the dream vision, everything kind of connects better by we've reorganized our people, animals, and crops into a circle and brought insects into the mix to be able to move our excreta and our crop residues through biological and thermochemical processes that collectively kind of keep those nutrients in the system and avoid them going out into the environment. Sort of a little bit more, maybe a little bit more helpfully, if again, not very artfully, I picked sort of the top 3 massive waste streams I can think of from the food system: food waste, cereal residues, crop residues, and excreta. And then sort of insects can be used to make feed from food waste. Black soldier flies in particular are great at that. We can compost our cereal residues together with our excreta or food waste. We can thermochemically transform our cereal residues and our excreta to form biochar, which makes wonderful soil amendments. And so if this is the sort of beautiful tangle we can get if we use our resources and our wiles correctly or well. So just to say, we prosecute these issues, toward nutrient stewardship and sovereignty, in parallel, but in the Finger Lake system where I live in upstate New York, and Lake Victoria, which is bordered by Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. So I'm working in the the Kenyan part of that system. So in Ithaca, it's kind of like a performative thing. We do have harmful algal blooms, but we have a pretty good waste management system. So it's more of an artistic, silly thing, or, it has to be done ha style here. But in Kenya, it's very serious. People need the food security. They need the sanitation. They're delighted at the improved livelihoods and well-being that this provides. And globally, it's serious, right? We got the health of the aquatic environment, the climate, the sustainability of our soils, and our livelihoods are at stake. So we gotta, it gets silly, but it's also not that silly. The kind of general proposition is we're trying to redirect those nutrients in our urine from the lake, where we're neglecting the land and letting it, go to heck, and we're destroying the aquatic environment. Can we shift to where we just direct the same nutrients to the agricultural fields and spare both aquatic and support our agricultural requirements? To do that, we can directly use P as P locally, or we can make fancier products. And so we're trying to do both. P works fine, but it's heavy. You can't move it very far. It's got those, I mentioned it's low in some of those micronutrients. It's salty. It's got a high pH if you let it sit around. Are the nutrients exactly what your soil needs? Maybe not. Has it got contaminants? So we are motivated both to use it locally, but also to try to make more refined products with it. So we're sort of here in the United States, we're kind of like up against this massive, we're sort of stuck in this paradigm of modern sanitation. So that's like a $5 billion wastewater treatment plant in New York City and a more conventional wastewater. This is extremely sophisticated capability that costs like millions or billions of dollars per one of them. And once you've got it, it's hard to just move on to something else. So we're sort of locked in on that. Unlike our counterparts in Africa. So we look sort of silly and David against Goliath there. 80% sewer, 20% septic, and like almost only 500,000 people are not served at all. But 80% of people worldwide are not served by modern sanitation. So here's our little David against Goliath. We invent a whole bunch of source separated potties. I think we're upping our game every time and having a lot of fun with serving at festivals and whatnot. We got some public health students have helped us out with some propaganda. We have these little source separating potties in the buildings around here. We've done a lot of work showing that urine is perfectly good fertilizer. Lots of other people have too. This is just the simple version. This week we're going into to do an experiment on a golf course where we found that our friends there, surprisingly open to replacing their fertilizer needs with urine-based fertilizers. There's a blog post about it a couple years ago after I gave a talk, and the people here seem really into it too. And we've done a bunch of work also on P-powered using these different cereal residues and compost and biochar. And we find that weirdly, this crappy looking mix to the right there works just as well as soil for producing crops, weirdly. And so we've demonstrated that at community garden scale, where we fill straw bale garden gardens that are framed in straw bales. We're putting pea on the straw bales, and then between seasons we put it on the, or even within the seasons on the crops themselves. But it works very well as a gardening technique, very yummy gardens. And we're producing, we can produce nice potting mixes. Biochar has good effects on that. Anyway, so it's interesting to think of the role of biochar in the whole system. Looking at the clock there, Alexis, am I going too long? Anyway, so the presence of the biochar has significantly helps the breakdown of the material, and it gives a material that has better water holding capacity and breaks down quicker. And in the literature, has a lower greenhouse gas, and in some of our experiments also shows a lower greenhouse gas level. So just saying that in Saudi Arabia, where I'm going to go visiting in a couple of weeks, they've sort of scaled this up to the citywide level, taking various food waste and food system wastes and producing biochar that they use then to green the desert city, which is pretty impressive. Like, for example, chicken poop from a chicken farm, really making this sort of permanently, they feel, lush green city that just makes it the quality of life much better, reducing the temperature and whatnot. So we have a big active group of people very, very interested in biochar and similar in East Africa. My colleague Johannes Lehmann quoted here in the Financial Times commenting on how entrepreneurs are interested in pea cycling, but they're also very interested in biochar and pea cycling together. So Johannes has been instrumental, and I've been very active in this, and so have many others in this regional network here that's got a ton of energy around this. And my own collaboration going for the last few years is with Professor Charles Midega, based in Kisumu, which is a little bleb off of the larger Lake Victoria. And you can see from the satellite view here, the smaller body of water is where there's a city on it, is very, very contaminated, and it's causing periodic fish kills that are quite frequently there. So we've got a great team of people, a bunch of Cornell students and African talent there, having a great time working together. One aspect of it that I'm really excited about is this collaboration between a container-based sanitation company and a local youth slum dwellers association, the Kisumu Young Agripreneurs, who are super keen to make fertilizer from the sanitation products. The sanitation company is a subsidiary of Sanergy, where they service about, probably 150,000 people in Nairobi, and they have a smaller, so they have two subsidiaries, two out of the three are shown here. Fresh Life does sanitation, and Regen Organics makes fertilizer products from the poop, and Black Soldier Fly feed from the poop. And so Kisumu is a secondary site where they haven't gotten the Fresh Life, the Regen Organics part going yet. So it's sort of an opportunity for us. So they've got a toilet factory there in Kisumu. It's right on the wastewater treatment plant's footprint. And then this is the Kisumu Young Agripreneurs. Roy is the head of that. Awesome guy. Here's my collaborator, Charles, and a couple of Cornell grads. At Kia, they have sort of an outdoor scheme, raising vegetables in this informal settlement. They have a lot of Black Soldier Fly stuff going on. They're dynamic and fantastic. They have an aggregation system. People in the community are growing the veggies. And so they're super keen to sell, make urine-based fertilizers as part of that system. We brought them a pyrolysis kiln here for making biochar, and they found that it's already making the crops grow better. You don't have to water them as often. They germinate quicker. Yes, here be making biochar in Kenya. They're dumping pea on the stuff. We found that our pea, this is like water quench char control, nothing, urine chemical fertilizer, and pea quench char. And yes, the pea quench char can be as good as, statistically as good as the synthetic fertilizer, but I've done a lot of experiments with this stuff, and I wasn't too happy about its performance. So, sorry, here's us cutting a deal between the Fresh Life, the Kiwasko, the Water and Sanitation Authority, and then the Kia, the Young Agripreneurs, and the Informal Settlement, and then us university folks teaming up. So we've got a deal where we're going to be servicing 80 toilets and trying to make fertilizer from that as our initial go around. So we started figuring out how to I wasn't crazy about the quenching methods, I started to say. The numbers I was getting from the bioassays and from the chemical analysis just weren't impressive to me. Like we're getting like 10, 20-fold more nitrogen on these biochars when we're doing this alkaline dehydration method. So we've kind of really gone to town on that. When as I left for Kenya, I'm like, oh, we're killing our plants and they're not doing very well. But then while I was there, like the bioassays proved that actually this stuff is great. There's just too much nitrogen. So I just had to back it down. But the stuff grows really no fertilizer, full synthetic. And then our stuff normalized for nitrogen is still just like really doing well. Doing well in the assays. So I won't go into details since I'm running short on time. But, also, now the Golden Grow product is doing well compared to the controls in Kenya as well. So there I am, just like my grandmother used to lecture me about waste not, trying to put it across to my 1-year-old grandson that, he should be, taking his urine-based fertilizer seriously, apparently. So like, we're trying to beef this up, collecting on lime to keep the urea from hydrolyzing, dry it on biochar. What we see our products raising the pH of these ambient, extremely problematic acid soils, nutrients from the urine, the wonders of biochar really helping those crops. And so, we're trying to scale it up to the huge scale from our 80 potties and trying to figure out how to price and make some money while we're doing it. Hope we can make that work. Then we're also working with rural people. We were collaborating or working with an organic training center for a few years and just not getting a lot of traction on the urine-based fertilizer. But one guy took a real big interest, and then Harun, a farmer leader, the facilitator from the organic center, Manor House, was working with, they got psyched about producing these pea-powered composts. So we got Harun then got his whole community interested and started doing experiments. The Sustainable and Organic, what's it stand for? Sustainable Organic Food and Development Initiatives. Another partner working with a lot of farmers who are by now super pumped about urine-based fertilizers, and then another big farmer network. So we're working with 3 big farmer networks by now, sort of, just starting to take off with farmer interest and starting to develop farmer research networks to build the evidence base and the conviction and the skill to really make this work. So anyway, we're starting to wrap up now. It seems kind of obvious to me at this point, and yet there's huge cultural and social barriers. It's still seems gross to people. There's a lot of technical things we need to figure out. You're having to develop a whole operational system. There's legal and regulatory hurdles that we need to overcome. One issue of concern is pharmaceuticals. There's emerging evidence that it's not that much of a problem, but it's kind of hard to give a definitive answer for a question that big. Thousands of drugs out there. We work at the nexus of art and science in our local community here at the Soil Factory. We have a lot of artisan events around, with related in one way or another to this, including that huge pea-powered garden, the African circular bionutrient economy, again, gradually socializing and exploring, the carbon credits network, and getting, normalizing the idea, getting entrepreneurs interested. There's the Rich Earth Institute is the biggest pea cycling entity in the United States, which doesn't say that much because we're kind of behind a lot of other countries. But they organize an annual event that brings people from around the world, and those are our people. It's really exciting to hear research going on all around the world on this topic. They come out with a lot of resources about understanding the issues. Resources for gardeners, resources for farmers, resources for people who might want to start a community-based urine diversion program. And I feel like, again, it's sort of silly in the United States. I mean, what's the point, really? But, I think sea level rise is going to come for our plant. If Plan A is a $5 billion, $10 billion, the latest one proposed in New York City, $10 billion price tag, well, sea level rise is going to take that out. That's infrastructure at the very bottom of a gravity-fed system that's at the bottom of the watershed, and every coastal wastewater treatment plant seems to me to be doomed by just the inexorable reality of climate change. So we got to be ready with Plan B when people figure out that Plan A isn't going to work. Anyway, so just as my last point, it's a journey. People individually have to go from being sort of horrified by the idea to all sorts of jokes and puns and silliness. And then eventually it seems like, of course I should do that. Of course I should take care of the nutrients for my body, just any more than I would throw trash out the window. I wouldn't destine my personal nutrients for the lake and the wastewater treatment, but it doesn't make any sense. Mix it in with PFAS, why would I do that? And collectively, we've been approaching sanitation as problem solving, but I think people are starting to feel like, no, it's an opportunity to capture valuable resources, and then it's not a standalone thing. It's part of a more holistic view that a journey towards a circular economy more broadly. Anyway, thanks so much. I really appreciate you giving me a chance to talk about this.
Well, this is fantastic, Rebecca. It's so exciting to see so much progress and interest in this important cause. I really do hope we do one day move away, as you say, of putting all of our industrial waste in with all of these precious bodily fluids that have value and just creating a big problem. Yeah, separating and reusing where we can really makes a lot of sense. So thanks so much for bringing this important message to us for World Food Day.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Hello, happy World Food Day. I'm Alexis Badenmare. I'm the political director of the Organic Consumers Association, and I'm here with Zeead Yaghi. He's the author of this report, Pathways Toward Food Sovereignty in Lebanon. We'll be talking about Zeead's report. Zeead, so wonderful to meet you. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Alexis. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure and it's a real honor.
Well, this is such a fascinating report that you put together. You had the opportunity to travel through the countryside in Lebanon, meeting people from all of these fantastic agroecology and food sovereignty organizations. We have some photos here. You can just briefly describe each organization.
Yeah, so this is MADA. This is a sort of an organization founded in Akkad in northern Lebanon that strives towards agroecological principles and agroecology in the region and supports local farmers in the region access to the market, and basically allows and sort of organizes with them to advocate on their behalf. A lot of these organizations that I've interviewed are kind of doing sort of the same thing, but in their own spaces, in their own kind of parts of the country. There is, we can talk about it later, there is sort of a movement towards combining efforts. And so that people don't do twice as much work in terms of the advocacy. But yeah, this is Mada. This is sort of in northern Lebanon. And this is Jibal. Jibal is they're based in Beirut, but they're more research focused and research oriented. They produce countless literature, very important literature on food sovereignty and food security in Lebanon, or lack thereof. They also, as well, like Mada, do sort of on the ground engagement and training with farmers who wish to switch to more sustainable growing and sustainable farming. They also opened a market, a farmers market in Beirut, which they then eventually over a couple of years have allowed the farmers themselves to own it and run it. So they're all about empowerment, but also they're very important with regards to like the research that comes out of the region.
Very cool.
So Badaro Urban Farmers Market, they're a really cool bunch. They were founded by somebody who basically wanted to was somebody who worked in the corporate world, but wanted that his family in Lebanon had access to sort of healthy, organic food. And so they started organizing in Badaro, which is sort of a more chic bourgeois neighborhood in Beirut, where they, again, one of the biggest problems that we have, we'll get to this later, is sort of access to the local market. So Badaro Urban Farmers Market, they started contacting local producers that not just do food, but also soap, other kind of craftsman stuff. This person now they're part of a coalition of farmers market that are popping up across the country to again facilitate the access to the consumer of agroecological and sort of sustainable farming and sustainable producers. Arc-en-Ciel is sort of the big sort of group here in among the people that I interviewed. Arc-en-Ciel have been there for a while, I think almost 30 years now. They are a big sort of organization that a nonprofit that do several things. They're involved in sort of conservationship, so they protect and take care of a huge swath of land in the Bekaa and sort of the central plains of the country. That they also run, where they also take care of animals and everything. They also are trying to present themselves as an organization that can provide local alternatives to sort of farming resources that farmers need, like pesticides, like all of that. So they're one of the ways that they fight for food sovereignty is to basically try to provide through local manufacturing and local industry a lot of the resources that farmers need, so that they do not depend on sort of the global market to buy the stuff, so that they can have it cheaper, more organic, and more sustainable. They also have something called Beit al-Muzara, or the Houses Farmer, which is also another version of these sort of farmers markets, where they collaborate with up to 200, 300 farmers in the valley, offering them spaces to sell their products in it. But they also, I think they are kind of the more organized, more hierarchical, and maybe, they're not exactly the most radical of the organizations, because they do think of working at scale and working at a certain volume that maybe a lot of the other organizations are a bit sensitive about, but we can talk about that also later. Budur Sur, Agri Movement Lebanon is one of the more explicitly political organizations. This is a group of activists and campaign advocates striving towards agroecology, striving towards food sovereignty, food security in Lebanon. They operate and they organize primarily in southern Lebanon, so they have a lot of contact with the farmers that have had their livelihoods destroyed or very much derailed by the latest Israeli war on the country, and they are on the front line of sort of advocating towards farmer-centric and food sovereign solutions with the Ministry of Agriculture. They are sort of, again, more on the radical end of the political spectrum that we have here. Soils Permaculture. So this is an old organization. These people are more technocratic in terms of they are an organization that provides technocratic, organic, sustainable, environmentally sustainable solutions and support for farmers who wish to switch from sort of growing at who want to switch towards the agroecology principles. And it's more of a network of agricultural engineers, chemists that are in touch, that are living not just in Lebanon but across the country, that are in touch with other similar organizations around the world that share expertise. They're the more sort of technocratic group interviewed in the report. I think this is the last one, Buzurna Jazurna. Yeah, so Buzurna Jazurna literally translates our seeds, our roots. They're very much invested in protecting local seeds and pushing for farmers to use local native seeds that are much more adaptive to the climate in Lebanon, that are much more resilient to climate shocks, but also towards food sovereignty and food security. Right, sort of efficiently, and don't use the ecology the same way efficiently that local native seeds do. This is one of their jobs. So they have actually founded a bunch of seed banks in the bank in the valley, in the Bekaa Valley, in several villages, and they're hoping to actually turn this into a national program. They also very much they're also like a farming cooperative, so they basically use agroecology principles to produce multiple crops, multiple stuff that grow natively in a sustainable manner, which then they sell in their own sort of, which they sell themselves, or they sell at other farmers market. They have they're the most sort of, I think, radical of kind of the growers or the farmers that we have within this group that I've interviewed. They're very, very impressive. They have a very sort of long-term vision of what they're trying to do. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is so inspiring to see what's happening in Lebanon in the face of huge challenges. My organization, Organic Consumers Association, we got our start in the 1990s, and ever since then, our most popular campaign has been Millions Against Monsanto. I've worked on that campaign since 2005, but I only recently learned that pesticides and genetically engineered seeds are not the only way that Monsanto, which is now owned by the German corporation Bayer, is poisoning farmland around the world. Monsanto is also a military contractor, and it's the monopoly producer of white phosphorus weapons for the War Department, along with its partner, Israel Chemicals Limited. White phosphorus weapons are incendiary weapons, chemical weapons that are illegal to use against civilians, but Israel has been using these weapons paid for and supplied by the United States against its neighbor Lebanon, primarily in these regions that we've just been seeing, these farming regions of southern Lebanon. So Zeead, your report for the Arab Reform Initiative on pathways towards food sovereignty in Lebanon is based on interviews with these farmers. And because of not only the war, but mostly the war, Lebanon is experiencing a severe food crisis. What is the extent of the food crisis in Lebanon today?
Well, I mean, the food crisis in Lebanon is multifaceted. The war is the geopolitical situation, the Israeli war, successive Israeli wars, are one means in which the food crisis is exacerbated. But there are multiple reasons why it is the way it is. So Lebanon is a country that is sort of almost 80% dependent on exports for its foodstuff, its food production and consumption. We have a lot of deficit when it comes to fruits, dairy, animal products, and most importantly, wheat and bread, which is sort of the basics of sort of the nutrition. So the reason why we have this deficit and leading to a food sovereignty and ultimately food security issue is long-standing political economic choices taken by sort of capitalists and traders in Lebanon in tandem with the Lebanese government to reorient our political economy and agricultural sector towards sort of export-oriented and food-imported sort of system. So since the 1960s, when especially the Lebanese government started to invest in agriculture in the country, it has mostly invested in crops and in produce that can be sold at a profit outside, within the logic that this would bring some money to the treasury, and this would bring some money to farmers, and most importantly, it would bring money to a few monopolists in the country that have sort of the monopoly from the state to import and export food. Okay, so this basically has created a deficit in terms of what kind of food, what kind of agriculture can be supported, what kind of agriculture can be invested in. So this is the situation that we have born out of the 60s and the 70s. Once after the Lebanese Civil War happened and sort of the retraction of the state and retraction of public funds from support of agricultural investment, we're entering here in the 70s and the 80s and 90s, this neoliberal era. There is less public investment in, of course, in the agriculture, but it's replaced by private interests and sort of international organizations such as the World Bank or the IMF or FAO that are then, they themselves are sort of now providing the capital for this export-oriented sector. So in a way, the orientation or the logic of agriculture, of the agricultural sector in Lebanon stayed the same. It's still interested in providing exports that can bring some sort of revenue to the treasury and to businessmen. But the funding has sort of shifted from public funding to international organizations, debt, and private financiers. So what does this mean? This means that a country which is very much has high density of population but has small patch of land is now very much at the mercy of the global the global market and the fluctuations of the global market, and at the mercy of the geopolitical situation. Because if you're depending on basically imports to provide food for those who live there, that means you want to have always access to hard currency, so the US dollar, and you need sort of peace, and not sort of an expansionist colonizing state at your border, going to war with you every 5 to 10 years. So this puts us in a very precarious situation, because what happens when Israel decides to, okay, I'm going to launch a military campaign on Lebanon, Israel will threaten to, let's say, bomb the airport or bomb the port. These are the two access points that allow food into access into the country. What happens when there's a financial collapse, as Lebanon witnessed in 2019, 2020, engineered by the state's elites and engineered by the political regime? The hard currency that is available to buy or to subsidize imports is gone. So that is very much a sort of a recipe towards famine, towards disaster, in Lebanon. So we're always walking a very, very fine line, because we are extremely dependent on imports for our food security, and because our food sovereignty is very much non-existent with regards to because the farming community and the agricultural sector that are supported in the country are only supported towards producing stuff that can be sold abroad. So that is kind of the fundamental, these are kind of the fundamental and the broad kind of overview of how the political economy of agriculture functions in the country. And it's a result of about 56 years of similar policies. So, yeah. For example, right? Go ahead, Alexis.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, for example, right now, the World Bank has approved a $250 million loan for the Ministry of Agriculture to be distributed among farmers in terms of contract farming. So what does that exactly entail? It means that farmers will be given loans to produce raw material, or produce, farming or produce farming products that then will be sold immediately to foreign companies. Okay, so again, this is extremely problematic, because the Ministry of Agriculture will say, well, we're providing funds, we're providing support for the farms. Well, you're not really. You're providing debt. Okay, You're providing debt for them to produce something that then will immediately be sold to outside consumers, to outside multinationals. It has nothing to do with consumption in the country. So again, you're kind of pawning off the small workforce of farmers that we do have, and the small bits of agricultural land that we do have, towards to outside manufacturing and outside companies. This has already started in Lebanon. This isn't new, but the scale of it, this new loan scheme, is very much big, the biggest that we've seen. We do have, for example, French wineries, French companies, basically renting land in the Bekaa Valley to grow grapes for the wines, for example, because the land in the Bekaa is so suitable for specific types of grapes that they like to make their own wine. So already we have bits and parts of the land, of the agricultural land, that is kind of pawned for food companies that are completely outside of the country, that have no benefit to the people that live there, besides, okay, so we're paying wages for a few people to pick up the grapes, okay? This is not a new story. In places like Tunisia, for example, you have hundreds of thousands of acres of producing olive oil that is then sent to Spain so that it can be then bottled as Spanish olive oil. So this is kind of the model that we're all going towards, at least in this region, sort of this asymmetric model where you have rich countries and rich corporations buying up poor labor and poor land in the global south to produce food resources and products that are not going to be consumed and are not going to benefit people in the global south. And so that's kind of where we are today.
Yeah, it's suspiciously similar to what happens also in Ukraine. When the United States did the coup in 2014, that was basically a fight over whether or not Ukraine would take World Bank financing or whether they wanted to take financing from Russia. But nowhere in there was the idea of food sovereignty for Ukraine. It was just a land grab by two larger powers. And it seems like that's how it's continuing to play out.
Yeah, I mean, the irony is that kind of capital has no borders, right? So you can pawn off debt, you can send debt, you can buy contracts everywhere, but people can't move. Right? The people can't move. The borders are very much harsher and stronger for mobility of immigrants, of migrants, of people leaving situations that are in places and destitute. But money can flow, capital can flow easily. So that's kind of the situation that we find ourselves here. And again, for a place like Lebanon that's very small, that has Israel on the southern border, that has sort of now a very precarious relationship with the new regime in Syria, with the new state in Syria. So we don't know. We don't know what the food security situation will look like 5-6 months from now, a year from now. So as long as the Lebanese state and its backers and its funders and the World Bank and the IMF and the FAO that are very much active in the country do not pursue a policy that centers farmers, that centers local production, we are going to find ourselves in successive crises of food sovereignty and food security.
Yeah, well, that's what makes all of the projects that you studied in your report so inspiring. I recall, I think I remember that Juzaruna, they had a seed bank that they said could serve all the farmers in Lebanon. That was a report that was in Al Jazeera. They have people are innovative and they're hardworking and they want to create these sustainable food systems and have them be agroecological and farmers in charge of them, collective organizing, all that stuff. So do you think, I was kind of surprised by how many great projects there were in Lebanon. What do you think is the way forward after you've done this report? You know exactly what the problem is, but so many solutions are coming up. Do you think there's a bridge?
Obviously, there's a vibrant community of activists and advocates and farmers challenging sort of the established norms that have led us to this sort of series of crises. Buzuna among them, the seed banks and everything. But in order to very much have sustainable long-term solutions, we have to either compel the state to support what we're doing. The state is the law. The state has power. So we can advocate, we can fight, we can yell, we can throw, we can kick. But ultimately, if the Minister of Agriculture wants to run a FAO program, the ministry was going to run a FAO program. So there's, I think, two ways. We have to, I think, organize ourselves very much politically to compel the Minister of Agriculture, to compel the government, and to compel sort of local representatives, be they at a local level in the municipalities, which the organizations that I cited do very well, but also regional representatives at the level of parliament, to basically force the government's hand to listen to our solutions and to apply the solutions that we need and advocate on behalf of farmers. So I think right now we have a lot of solutions, we have a lot of smart people working on this stuff, but we are still sort of trying to figure out how do we force the government to listen to us. And the government has, the government Lebanese government I'm not going to generalize, but at least the Lebanese government since the end of the civil war is in the pockets of bankers, real estate developers, and the tourism industry. So that doesn't mean that it's an uphill battle. That doesn't mean they don't listen to us, because it's a small country. You can do campaigns, you can do media campaigns, you can block the roads, you can push and yell at people. So I think that's kind of where the next step of the fight should be. We have the expertise, but it's not an issue of expertise. It's not a technical problem. These are political problems. These are issues of redistribution of wealth and redistribution of resources. So I think the next step is to develop amongst all of us, people striving towards food sovereignty, security in the country, into coordinating our efforts and pushing the Ministry of Agriculture and pushing the government towards adopting some of the sustainability principles that we know. Speaking for myself, I am aware that you cannot sort of overnight overthrow these people or overthrow the government. We've had multiple attempts of overthrowing the government and that have failed. But I'm also sort of not allergic, but I'm also don't want us to be only focusing on the local, on the small stuff, because our issues are issues that are happening in each Lebanese village, each Lebanese town, is happening in each country in the Mediterranean that is involved in this. So we have to have a national vision of food sovereignty, food security. We have to have a national political program, and we have to interact with people in Palestine, people in Syria, people in Tunisia, people all across the world that are basically facing the same issues. Again, it's not, our opponents are not mysterious. It's not somebody weird. It's not some sort of evildoers. It's the same corporations, it's capital, it's concentrated in few major cities, between London and New York, Geneva. And so there's nothing pernicious or weird happening here. So it's about fighting for the most. It's for most people, it's fighting for justice. So I think at least at a local level, we have to organize ourselves to coordinate our efforts together to push the Ministry of Agriculture to become a Ministry of the Farmer. I'm not expecting that overnight we can become a country that is entirely dependent on local production. So it's impossible. There's not enough land. There's not enough farmers. But I would like for us to not have to depend 80% on food imports. I would like for us not to, every time there's a war, to worry about starvation the next day. So that's on a local level and on Lebanese level. On a regional level, the IMF and capitalists and the World Bank and FAO, they work together in all the countries. So we have to organize with our comrades and farmers in these same countries, because it's the same. We're facing the same sort of opponents. We're facing the same problem. So our opponents think locally, regionally, and globally. So we have to do the same thing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Especially to me, I live in Washington, D.C. And when I came up as a young activist, it was the anti-globalization movement, the protests in Seattle against the WTO, the protests here against the IMF and the World Bank. And this solidarity and action remains necessary. That movement has fallen off a bit, at least in the United States, but it's never been more important than today.
Speaking from planet is small, our opponents are the same. It's not strange that poor people in all over the world are facing the same issues. That should be incentive for us to speak to each other and to coordinate with each other, because again, our enemies, the bankers, speak to each other. Morgan Stanley and Deutsche Bank and BNP Paribas, they talk to each other. They go to the same schools, they go to the same dinners. So we have to think the same way. We don't have their monetary prowess, but we have numbers, and we have our own sort of ideas about how things should go. So I totally agree. I don't advocate sort of people sticking in their own lane or sticking in their own region. If people in the United States don't organize against for example, decreasing funds for the Israeli war machine, people in Palestine are dying. Some of us, while some of us here in the Arab world can't really do much because we live under sort of oppressive regimes when it comes to that. So I'm not for excluding anyone. I think, especially people in the United States, people in Europe, have a lot of stake here, not simply because they also suffer from issues from poverty and from food sovereignty issues, but because their elected officials are responsible for a lot of the terrible stuff that might happen here.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that important call to action. And hopefully a lot of people will see this video and understand now what's going on thanks to your good work. So thanks so much, Zeead. Really inspiring.
Thank you, Alexa. Thank you for having me, and it's been a real pleasure. I hope we can meet properly in person. I hope if you ever visit Beirut or if I'm in DC, we'll get to meet and talk properly.
That would be amazing. Yeah, I look forward to that. Hello and happy World Food Day. I'm Alexis Badenmeyer. I'm the political director of the Organic Consumers Association, talking to you all from Washington, D.C. And I'm joined by three friends from St. Louis, Missouri, Filla, Seraph, Gracynn, Kunkel, and Digger Romano. So welcome. My first question for you guys, as a little icebreaker, I'm really curious when each of you first learned about Monsanto.
So I first learned about Monsanto, and as far as being an activist and trying to do something, way back, and that would have been in the 90s and into 2000, there was discovered in a small community, Times Beach, Missouri, that a lot of dioxin had been dumped there, and so the EPA became a Superfund site, and it went on and on. But we uncovered concrete evidence that it was actually waste. The dioxins were produced by Monsanto. Yet another corporation took the fall for it, but the dioxin waste could be traced to Monsanto and their production of Agent Orange and other defoliants that they were testing. Agent White, I believe, and so we tried to stop. They wanted to incinerate the soil, so we tried to stop it unsuccessfully, but it became aware of the great reach that Monsanto had in military uses, agriculture, and landscaping uses.
Mm-hmm.
And
how about you, Lauren or Gracynn?
Yeah, Monsanto is just a well-known name in St. Louis, and you hear about it from their public relations perspective as this job creator in St. Louis, that is this innovator in St. Louis, and that's kind of what they try to put out there to the general public. But I became more aware of Monsanto and how harmful it was. I'm a physical therapist and have been for about 15 years, and I've had quite a few patients that have suffered the neuropathy side effects of Agent Orange, and looked into it more from there and really had my eyes open to Monsanto's participation in white phosphorus after we started to become more and more active in resisting the occupation in Gaza. And that ties into the work we're doing to fight the ITL facility here in St. Louis too.
Yeah. How about you, Gracynn?
I actually first heard of them 2 to 3 years ago, I think. I live in the South City area of St. Louis, and we actually get a lot of the fumes from the Superfund site that's in, is it Sauget?
Sauget.
Sauget, yeah, from Sauget across the river. So firstly, when I moved to this area, I was always trying to figure out what I was smelling in my backyard and why it was so potent. And then, as Lauren said, I became involved in community organizing and activism around, things that are happening in Gaza and also things that are happening in our backyards up here with chemical producers. So that's kind of how I learned about them.
Very cool. Well, Digger's activism precedes mine, but I came into this as a food activist working with Organic Consumers Association, and aside from Agent Orange, it never, I didn't really put two and two together. I should have figured if Monsanto created chemical weapons during the Vietnam War, that they probably were a military contractor before that, and that they would probably keep their fat Pentagon contracts. But I only learned about the white phosphorus production, that Monsanto was involved in white phosphorus production, from Mitchell Cohen's book, Mitchell Cohen's Monsanto book. And Mitchell Cohen is a Green Party activist, as I am and as you all are. So that's a nice connection that we share. So I was really surprised to read that in his book. And it sent me down a rabbit hole to learn all the ways that Monsanto had been involved in the military. But I learned about, I'm going to bring my slides up so I can bring up the article that brought us all together. Lauren and Seraph Gracynn wrote this really important article in Common Dreams about what's happening as we speak in St. Louis. So St. Louis not only is Monsanto's hometown, where Monsanto creates their GMOs, their pesticides, and their chemical weapons, including white phosphorus, but their partner, Israeli Chemical Limited, which was also a shock to me. I mean, I was married to a Jewish man. My daughter is Jewish. We raised her Jewish. And I really, I bristle at this, it's all Israel's fault. It's all the Jews' fault. But then here we go. So I like to blame the Pentagon. But here is incontrovertible truth that Israel and the Pentagon work together even to produce weapons in the United States. So Israeli Chemical Limited works with Monsanto, which is now owned by Bayer, to produce white phosphorus weapons. And they're getting a tax rebate to expand their production. So I was just so shocked to read this article that Lauren and Gracynn put together. And so we are going to get deep into this, the current events in St. Louis around this. But I think it's really important to start by going back to where Monsanto got its start. And I guess, for my audience at Organic Consumers Association, they're going to recognize things like this. Why is Monsanto pushing food that rats won't eat? That's from animal experiments where literally animals turn their noses up. If they do have an opportunity to, they will choose food that is not soaked with pesticides. So these are photos, Digger, these are photos from protests that you organized right at Monsanto headquarters, yeah?
It's been a few years, but yes, we did the March Against Monsanto, which was a national movement. And right, and because their world headquarters was there, we chose that. And we had some really big, hundreds and hundreds of people at some of these. And of course, it was 2018, Bayer brought them, and now it's now their agricultural division of Bayer. It's at the Monsanto, what was the Monsanto?
So have they taken down the Monsanto signs at the...
Oh, yeah, now they have Bayer signs up.
Oh, okay.
Of course, they have the Monsanto Fund, it was called, where they buy off local institutions, such as the Missouri Botanical Gardens and universities, by giving them lots of money so they won't criticize them. It's now called the Bayer Fund.
Yeah. Crazy. All right. Okay, so these are protests outside Monsanto headquarters. Why is Monsanto suing farmers? My audience will probably know that story about how Monsanto has patents on their seeds. So, they also will just take the non-genetically modified seeds off the market so that farmers have only one choice, but to buy Monsanto's genetically modified seeds. But then they're not allowed to save those seeds. And even if they inadvertently end up having seeds that regrow themselves on their property, Monsanto can sue and prevent these farmers from stealing their license, stealing their intellectual property. That's the theory. And then, of course, genetic contamination of our food, pesticide contamination of our food. And I guess the GMO issue has taken second fiddle now to the pesticide issue. And I think that's only because there's a lot more science on the impact of glyphosate, and the International Agency on Cancer Research said that glyphosate causes cancer. Now there are lawsuits against Monsanto and now Bayer. So these issues have gotten much bigger than I ever thought they would. I've been working in organic consumers since 2005, and it's pretty exciting to see the progress made, at least on the legal level, against Monsanto. But now we'll take it back. And when we were speaking before we started our on-air conversation, I told Lauren and Gracynn and Digger, I said, okay, I'm going to take you guys back to the history of Monsanto's military contracting. But then Digger said, wait, it goes back 100 years.
Yes, to World War I. They started as, they weren't involved in agriculture at all. It was all chemicals at the beginning. And they had contracts with the U.S. military, even for World War I. And of course, this was another way that taxpayers helped subsidize the profits of Monsanto. And, something that really continues to this day.
Absolutely. Yeah, we learned from Smedley Butler that war is a racket. So if you can get Pentagon contracts as a corporation, you're set. And I guess they knew that from the get-go. So this is an image of the bomb being dropped on Hiroshima in Japan during World War II. And I think few people who've seen if you saw the movie Oppenheimer, you would have no clue that Monsanto was involved in the Manhattan Project. The story is a bromance between Leslie Groves and Robert Oppenheimer. But the truth is that there was just as close of a relationship between Leslie Groves, working for the Pentagon, and Charles Thomas, the lead chemist of Monsanto. He was an essential part of the Manhattan Project because they had to have a chemist do the trigger, the plutonium trigger, or it might have been I'm going to say plutonium, but don't quote me on that. Plutonium trigger for the weapon had to be engineered by a chemist, and that's how Monsanto got involved. And so they did the whole Dayton Project in Ohio. And of course, Charles Thomas worked very closely with Robert Oppenheimer. And in fact, Charles Thomas was offered that role. He was offered by Leslie Groves the role to be completely in charge of the Manhattan Project. So Monsanto was way at the top of this operation. And they may have actually initiated it. It might not be that Leslie Groves and the Pentagon went looking for corporate partners like Monsanto. It may be, in fact, that Monsanto went looking for opportunities to make nuclear weapons for the Pentagon, because it was in 1940, way before the Manhattan Project, that Monsanto and the Rockefeller Foundation created a cyclotron, an atom smasher, and a radiochemistry building to house it at Washington University in St. Louis. And then, of course, they would use this to create plutonium for the Manhattan Project. Monsanto ran Clinton Laboratories for a few years after the war, but then they were the longtime nuclear weapons producer at Mound Laboratory from 1943 all the way to 1988. And then, of course, they just left it, like they've left so many sites in the St. Louis area, as, it's like, okay, now that's somebody else's problem to clean up the mess. They left all of their employees with horrible cancers from the exposure to the nuclear weapons materials. So here's where it gets into expertise that I think you all have, and Lauren and Gracynn, you all mentioned this right from the bat in your article. So not only was Monsanto creating nuclear weapons in the Manhattan Project and then until the 1980s for the Pentagon, they were conducting secret experiments on U.S. citizens about the impact of exposure to radiation. So I've got the covers of two important books here, Eileen Welsom's The Plutonium Files, and that's about experiments in a medical context where, for instance, women who were pregnant were given a vitamin that had a radiation tracker in it. And supposedly they were studying like how the body absorbs vitamins, but they were deliberately exposing pregnant women to radiation. And then Behind the Fog is about the Cold War radiological weapons program. But it was Monsanto was involved. They were, of course, the source of the nuclear materials, but they seem to have been involved in planning because they chose their own town of St. Louis to experiment on U.S. citizens. So Lauren and Gracynn, you want to tell us about that, about Pruitt-Igoe?
I think it's important to, Lauren knows a lot about this too, so I'll let her speak on it, but it's also important for people who don't know the layout of St. Louis. The particular area where they did this was a primarily Black area. So it's super important in context that we mention that too, like who they targeted with these experiments. But I'll revert back to Lauren for some more information.
Yeah, and Digger might know too, but it's primarily around the area of the infamous Pruitt-Igoe, this housing, where they would go and spray, and kids would, primarily Black children, would talk about being told that it was something that was harmless, and they would go, like jump through the plumes. And I believe the story that they were told was that it was to kind of keep the mosquitoes out of the area, and that it was safe, and it was being sprayed on the Black residents of St. Louis in the housing projects to study the effects of radiation.
Yes, and the whole Pruitt-Igoe story is really a sad story. I know someone that actually lived there, and he said at first we thought it was wonderful, this nice, clean, new housing complex, but eventually, the contracts for maintenance were voided. People suffered from not being kept up, and and then the usual problems happen when there's not maintenance. The crime increases. And it turned into a terrible place. And then, of course, add on that, we have the fogging of radiation on people without their knowledge.
Disgusting. Yeah, it's shocking.
Mm-hmm.
And then the whole housing complex got demolished just 20 years later. They didn't, it seems like they may have been hiding evidence of their experiments. And what would wonder? You think so, Gracynn?
Yeah, I was just saying one would wonder why, they don't want this here, why suddenly the whole complex is destroyed and there's nothing else to be said about it. If they make it go away, then it goes away from the public view.
Right, that's right. It's not a monument to their misdeeds. Yeah, if it's gone, then people stop talking about it. Wow. All right, so let's get back to your article. And I don't know anything about the local context. You'll have to fill me in about all of that. But I did do some research more about Monsanto as a military contractor. I think most people are aware of Monsanto's production of Agent Orange and other agents, other chemical weapons for the Vietnam War. It was at a time when Bayer and Monsanto actually had merged. Post-World War II, Bayer and Monsanto, even though Bayer was a Nazi corporation and Monsanto was a Pentagon corporation, they merged, and they were still merged during the Vietnam War, and they were each together creating chemicals for the war, which of course were very damaging and continue to create birth defects in Vietnam today. This is an image from a museum about the impacts of the war. And this young man was born way after the war. This is a recent picture, without eyes because of exposure to the dioxins from Agent Orange and the other chemical weapons. So now here is the current topic, the white phosphorus weapons that Bayer and Monsanto continue to produce. And I did a little research to see, it's like officially these weapons are illegal. You're not supposed to use them in civilian areas or on humans, period. I don't even think it's legal to use them on combatants. But they say, oh, we use white phosphorus weapons for flares and to mark things so that we can see them in the battlefield. So like supposedly this is not really a weapon, it's a battlefield tool. But white phosphorus is alleged and in some cases absolutely proven to have been used against civilians. So there, in the case of the Waco, Texas siege in 1993, this was never proven. It didn't get to court, but there was a lawyer who was collecting testimony from the Delta Force assault team that did this raid, and they gave all of their information to this lawyer, Paul Wiltshire, but then Paul Wiltshire mysteriously died in his early 40s as he tried to investigate this instance of white phosphorus being used against U.S. citizens.
Shocker.
Yeah, seriously. And then in Iraq in 2004, the Battle of Fallujah, there's a wonderful documentary, hard to watch, but very important. It's called Fallujah, The Hidden Massacre. Because even though the Iraq War was fairly well televised, it was very well managed. And when the Battle of Fallujah happened, basically there was a media blackout. And we, the documentarians who made this movie just happened to be with a bunch of activists who were there to try to provide support to the civilian population, and they were able to document what happened. So I highly recommend Fallujah, The Hidden Massacre, about the use of white phosphorus in Iraq. And then in Gaza in 2008 and 2009, it was a very short but very bloody genocidal attack on Gaza on the part of Israel. I think it lasted only 21 days, but thousands of people were killed in this very short period. And the use of white phosphorus weapons was very well documented. But Human Rights Watch has a report called Rain of Fire. And then this is, most of what happens in war, you will never know about. But there was this one instance that got into the mainstream press of a little girl, 8 years old, Razia Aziz, in Afghanistan in 2009. Her family is suddenly attacked by troops from the United States, France, and Afghanistan, fighting the Taliban, they say. But they hit this poor girl's house with white phosphorus weapons. Her 2 sisters were killed. Everyone in her family was injured, but she was injured the worst. And she was taken to a U.S. military hospital to recover. And the U.S. military completely denied that those white phosphorus weapons could have been theirs. They said, oh, the Taliban must have gotten the white phosphorus weapons. But her father never believed that. And that was a fairly well documented situation. But the United States, I don't think, ever fessed up. And then Saudi Arabia has been using U.S. white phosphorus weapons in Yemen. 2016 is when this was documented. And that brings us up to the current conflict. Right after October 7th, Israel invaded Lebanon and Gaza right away and used white phosphorus weapons in both places right away. So this is just a little timeline that takes us to the main event, which is Lauren and Seraph, Gracynn, telling us about what's happening in St. Louis and why people in St. Louis care so much about this. And you all can tell me how to move through the slides. See, this is Gaza. All right, this is the beginning of your slides.
Yeah, essentially, we have a company here, as you mentioned before, Israel Chemicals Limited. They are, along with Monsanto, involved in white phosphorus production and distribution. They have been distributing it to Pine Bluff, Arkansas's arsenal there, the military arsenal. And they have been doing that under the guidance of the U.S. Department of Defense. We actually see, you can actually maybe go to the next slide. I probably put them in the wrong order. Go ahead, one or two more. One more. Okay, one more. One more. Let's see when we get to that. There we go. So, sorry. So this right here you can see is actually receipts from the Department of Defense website. And we can see on that website an escalation after October 7th of the Department of Defense putting in orders with ICL for numerous amounts of white phosphorus. If you go to the next slide, we've got another receipt right there where you can read that, and it says, you know, white phosphorus to support Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And we've got at the bottom there our sources, which are Amnesty International and the Human Rights Watch, who have verified the artillery shells of white phosphorus that were dropped on civilian homes and refugee camps in Gaza and Lebanon. And they identified them as having the clothes that came from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. So to us, that puts us squarely on the map of a city who has now been involved in the ongoing genocide in Gaza, in Palestine. And you know, it's not acceptable to most of us here. It's really not. And that's one of the reasons why me and Lauren met, and why we worked on this article. We vehemently do not want this here in our city. All the residents that we talk to don't want us here because, firstly, it's you know, playing a part in the genocide. And secondly, it is a community health hazard as well. Lauren?
Yeah, it plays out again, the systemic environmental racism that we've been seeing, like with Pruitt-Igoe, and really back to the colonial kind of genocidal history of indigenous people in St. Louis. But I wonder if you might want to go back maybe just a couple slides. Maybe we can go in reverse order here. Okay, let's talk about, so this is that's the Mississippi River and our water supply. And let's go to the other map that you just had. Okay, so that dot there, that is where the ICL facility is proposed to be built, and it's squarely in North City, which is the lowest income Black neighborhood in St. Louis. And then just to the north of that, northeast of that, is the river. And then this facility would be built within 1,000 feet of homes, residences. There's a school very close by. The O'Fallon Park Rec Center that's circled there, that's very close by, that's where we just had the community response to the tornado that just tore through our city. So this is just very dangerous in this area. It could actually, if it were to explode or to be damaged like in a tornado, it could wipe out the water supply of the entire city and certainly decimate the Black region in St. Louis. Let's go back the other way again. Okay, yes, and this is actually put out by the city. This is hotspots for childhood asthma, and you can see in North City, the highest ratio right in that same area is where they're planning to build this ICL chemical facility. And ICL, which I don't know if we've talked about this yet, they have been listed even by Times of Israel as being the worst environmental offender for Israel, and they've violated the Clean Air Act at their other facility in St. Louis. And so they would be, again, going and committing environmental racism here in North City. And then let's see what was before this.
So actually, if you want to go to the slide right before this, so this is a copy of paperwork we received when one of our other fellow organizers who's organizing for ICL out of STL, because that is our goal, he did a sunshine request for the paperwork and the permit for this new ICL facility, because this would be their third. They already have 2 others here in South Carondelet, as Lauren mentioned. So this facility would be their third one. And when he did this sunshine request, as you can see, what he was sent back was blank pages, completely redacted. They do not want us to know what they're going to be producing there, what they're going to be distributing, how they're going to be expelling the byproducts of the production. If you go to the next slide, or back the other way, yeah. This slide is the only paper that they gave us that was not redacted. And for those of you who aren't watching, it's essentially just a sheet of certain toxins that they're okay with us knowing will be produced there. We're not okay with any of them still, but we don't even know if this is the full list of what's going to be released by this facility. So, as Lauren said, with the asthma rate there, this is just bound to, from everything we understand about their facilities here in South Carondelet already, this facility is going to be bound to cause environmental problems and health problems for the community there. At their current facility, like Lauren mentioned, they have already violated the Clean Air Act, and the EPA did find elevated levels of toxins that cause cancer around that plant in that area. The actual facility that they're claiming that they're going to be building is a lithium iron phosphate processing facility. And we know from past lithium facilities and lithium recycling facilities that we've seen in the last year, they are very flammable. Add on top of that, we have no proof that they're not going to be producing or distributing white phosphorus from this facility too, because they claimed that they weren't doing that at all at their South Carondelet facility, but we know from the receipts on the DOD's website that they are. So we have no proof that they aren't going to be doing that as well at this third facility, which they're claiming and bragging is going to be the largest of its kind in North America, second only to a plant in China. So we
in the middle of a city where people live, that's just shocking.
Yes, and they're trying to, I'm sure they're trying to say, well, it's farther, it's a little farther out, but it's really not. As Lauren, I do want to say, I believe it's a mile within residential homes, but it's still way too close. And it is within 5 miles, that second or the first map we showed you, it's within 5 miles of the open air sedimentation ponds that give water to the entire city. And as we know, an excess amount. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say that's the big kind of rectangular blue thing, right?
Would be the open air sedimentation ponds.
Oh yeah, the other slide.
Okay, let's see.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. So the dot at the top is where our sedimentation ponds are. The location dot at the bottom is where that will be. And you can also just see how close it is to the river. And we know that an excess of, phosphates in the environment is going to cause algae superblooms and all kinds of overproductions of things in the water. So to even have the audacity to put it this close to the water. And by the way, it's about this close on the other side over here in South City at the South Carondelet. It's about the same distance as well. That's why they're shipping the white phosphorus down the river. So they're really ruining our water, and they're going to do much worse if they are successful, which hopefully they will not be. But if they were to be successful, they would, be opening us up to an even worse environmental, consequence.
Wow. Lauren, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think Gracynn brought up the Fredericktown facility, which was a lithium phosphate battery recycling facility about 80 miles south of here, and that burned to the ground a couple months ago. And they even listed on their website that they had one of the most sophisticated fire suppression systems in the world. And then, of course, they completely exploded and burned down. So we can't trust what ICL is obviously putting out, that this facility will be safe. And I don't know that we've mentioned either that they're getting $197 million from the federal government and 90% tax abatements from the city. And so this, again, plays out this legacy of supporting Monsanto and ICL and these type of corporations that just make the region more complicit in chemical genocide, when meanwhile we have had limited response from the city to the tornado that came through and affected the north side. And we also had a pretty prominent case of a Black-owned bakery that the city was trying to stop from opening at the same time, the Uhuru Bakery, while they were also trying to push this through. And I just want to mention real quick, too, there was one hearing that was supposed to allow public comment, and we did mobilize to attend that. But when we showed up, it was the Planned Industrial Expansion Authority Committee meeting. They said, we will take public comment, but you can submit it after we make our decision. So we made the decision, and then they supposedly read the comments we made, but they didn't play into that. And so it's really a David and Goliath story about the community fighting these powers that be at the city level, the state, the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense.
Wow. Well, thank you all so much for taking this on. How can people get involved? It's ICL out of STL. Is that a website?
Yes, if you go past our slides on the white phosphorus, and I think it'll be on there. So essentially, we have some asks for everybody, and we have some asks especially for our fellow community members. Our website is ICL out of STL. We have a petition and an email template that goes straight to the mayor and the board of aldermen. We're essentially asking them to stop this facility from being built. Some of the permits that they're using right now, we think the legality is questionable. So we do believe that the Board of Alders can stop this if they choose to. And we are really just trying to get the word out there and get as much community uproar, because we do believe that the only way to have a shot at stopping this is for the community to raise their voice and let it be known that we're not going to tolerate this here. So those are kind of the asks on there. And I will say also, one, like Lauren mentioned, we had the tornado going through here, and they're getting, like she said, $197 million from the government federally. So that's coming from taxes from everywhere. They're also then, they've gotten over $1 million in grants from our city. And then they're also getting at minimum $11 million in tax abatements from our city. And, we really, especially after these events of this year, the May tornado, there's community members that still don't have walls on the sides of their homes, and they're actually being kicked out of their homes, homes that have been in their families for generations. And there's people who, don't have a home for their kids to stay in now, and they're being threatened by CPS as if it's their fault that they haven't received any help to, get back into a home. We really feel that this kind of money needs to go to the community. It needs to go to the resources to help people rebuild their lives. We see absolutely no reason why a Israeli company that's partaking in genocide has more right to the land over here than the families that already live there.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add too that as a resident of St. Louis, it really galls me that they get these huge property tax abatements. And of course, this is a common urban problem, as many other big corporations and rich landowners get. And yet we see in St. Louis, our public school system is underfunded. City services are underfunded. I work with the St. Louis No Spray Coalition. We're trying to get the Parks Department to stop using Roundup and other things. And they were like, oh, well, we're so underfunded and short on staff. And yeah, yet this company can come in and get all these under, the guise of economic development. And there's so many other good places this money could be used. And corporations should pay their fair share.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for raising awareness about this issue. And I hope that everyone listening will get involved to support your campaign.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for having us.
I'm Alexis Badenmare. I'm the political director of the Organic Consumers Association, and I'm joined now by Omar Dieguez and Adam Scow. They're with the Center for Farm Worker Families and the Campaign for Organic and Regenerative Agriculture, based in Watsonville, California, which is the headquarters of Driscoll's Berries. Omar has just come off of a month-long hunger strike, asking Driscoll's Berries to go organic, not completely, just around schools, just to protect kids. So Omar, I'll start with you. What inspired you to do a month-long hunger strike?
What inspired me to do a month-long hunger strike was, growing up in Watsonville, being surrounded by the fields, and my parents working in the canneries, processing the vegetables and then just growing, like the fields were my playground, and just over the years seeing people being affected by pesticides, my neighbors, friends, family, and then just always having that visual of the farm workers out there in the fields working hard. And just as the years went by, I started learning about the pesticides. And, I work for Santa Cruz Barrios Unidos, and I work in the schools as a mentor. And getting to see some of these kids that are suffering from some of these pesticides, like learning disabilities, childhood cancer, ADHD, and the list goes on and on. It just hits home, how much it's affecting my community. And it wasn't until earlier this year in May when Dolores Huerta came down here and she gave a speech at one of the Quora events, and she talked about how everywhere else in the world they don't use these harmful pesticides, but we use them in the United States. And then one other thing she said was that the Nazis used some of these chemicals that they make these pesticides with in the war, in the gas chambers. And then hearing the testimony from a farm worker that worked in the fields, being pregnant, how her child was born with birth defects and learning disabilities, and how she acquired cancer working in these fields and had her stomach removed. That really grabbed my attention, and being an activist at a young age, I said something has to be done. And it started as a thought, doing the hunger strike. and I thought about it for a long time, and then it wasn't until I decided, you know what, I'm gonna move forward with this hunger strike, and I started talking to people and friends around, and and then next thing you know, I made a commitment to do this hunger strike against pesticides to bring awareness, and the goal was from the beginning was to bring awareness and to educate the community about this problem with the pesticides, and through that, I was able to meet a lot of other organizations. I was able to hear stories from community members, stories from students, and it was very, very humbling to do this hunger strike and to hear all these different stories and how much it affects uh, our people, our farm workers, our community, our students, and how much not only does it affect them, but it also affects Mother Earth, our drinking water, our air. And it's a lot bigger problem than we know.
And how about you, Adam? How did you get involved with the campaign organic and culture?
Hi, Alexis. Thanks for having us. I and about a dozen other activists started the campaign for organic and regenerative agriculture in response to this problem of toxic pesticides around Watsonville neighborhoods and schools. It's not a new problem, but unfortunately, it's a problem that, if anything, has been growing, or where we're seeing pesticide levels at all-time highs. Watsonville is famous for being a berry capital. We're also an apple capital. Martinelli's cider is from Watsonville as well. And we have an amazing climate here, blessed with an amazing climate to grow a wide variety of foods. But in the last 20 years, we've seen a boom in strawberry and raspberry and blackberry production, mostly for export all overseas. The companies brag that their products go all over the world every day, whether it's Japan, New Jersey, China, Nebraska, Russia, France, Morocco. And so Driscoll's is, I'm pretty sure, the biggest berry company in the world, valued at least at $4 or $5 billion. And the mindset to make as much money as possible, growing as many berries, has promoted the use of toxic pesticides at a high cost to our community. And so at the same time, Watsonville is in Santa Cruz County, and our county is also a leader in organics. Farmers and scientists here, I believe at UC Santa Cruz, help develop the modern USDA organic standard. And it's estimated that about 20% of our farmland is farmed organically here. And including Driscoll's, they have about 20% of their berries in organic production. So we feel it's very modest and reasonable request to the company that they transition their fields around the city and by the schools to organic. They're perfectly capable of doing that. They have a huge research department. They already farm organically in some places. It's just a question of what's doing right for the community and not being totally driven by greed. And so that's the background of us.
Yes. So how did they respond? Driscoll's. How did Driscoll's respond to your month-long hunger strike? And you had many public events, and a lot of news is getting out through the Santa Cruz local papers, and I heard about it through Organic Authority and through Max. There, I'll have to look up the article that I first read. Sorry, but yeah. So this has been big news in the organic world, certainly, because Driscoll's is, if you go to Whole Foods or any of the organic grocery stores, you're going to see Driscoll's organic berries and basically nothing else. So what was their response to you?
I personally myself have not received anything from them. But I've heard through other people that students that actually work for Driscoll's and people that have parents that they're very well aware of the hunger strike, very well aware of people questioning the pesticides that they're using, and so what I heard was that they Adam and Cora have sat with Miles Ryder, and his response was like, "We're working on it. We're working on it." I've heard that they're very well aware of this movement that's going on right now against pesticides, and I've heard that they've asked their employees not to engage in any of these uh, talks or protests or anything, to stay away from it. But they're very aware of what's going on, and I have not personally myself heard anything from them.
Wow. I just want to correct myself because I said Organic Insight or Organic Authority. I heard about your hunger strike first from Max Goldberg.
The meeting with Mr. Ryder and some of his associates, it was a cordial meeting in which they say they are considering our request, but can't really give us a firm timeline. It's really about 13 fields that they control around the city and the schools. It's a pretty small sampling when you think of their global holdings. And certainly if anybody could afford to do it, it would be Driscoll's. They're not, we're talking about their growers are contract growers under their control, used to fulfill distribution contracts all over the country and the world. So these are not some small mom and pop that's going to go broke if they transitioned. In fact, their growers have, because of their distribution contracts, even as they're transitioning, which is a 3-year period, they still have a buyer in the company while they begin their transition. So they don't really have any credible excuses, and therefore they tell the media and the press, we're looking into it, the regulations and the laws, everything we're doing is legal, which is unfortunately true. State law as well as federal law is very pro-pesticide. And so, it's fairly positive, but what we need is action. Talk is just nice, but it doesn't mean anything until the transition is put in place. So we're working to grow this movement, put more and more pressure on the company. Omar's hunger strike has definitely helped raise awareness in a big way, and we're going to have to keep building.
Sorry. I just wanted to wait. Oh yeah, Adam muted. All right. Okay. So Omar, there was another person who was on hunger strike with you. Tell us about Providence.
Providence is a young lady that's from Watsonville who's also been around this town for many years. Her family, they're growers for Driscoll's, and she joined this hunger strike when I started this hunger strike in the beginning of September. Maybe a week before, she started to speak about how she wanted to participate in it. She's very strong with the strawberry and pesticides. Her families are growers, and her doing the hunger strike was very significant because of the ties to the fields and to the ties with her family being Driscoll growers. And she shared, she brought something to this movement that I wasn't able to bring, was that experience of being a grower and just the insight on how Driscoll's monitors your fields as a grower and makes sure that you're using these pesticides, that you're growing the way they ask you. And she talked about, if you don't follow what they say, they either don't fund you or don't support you, or they make it very difficult for you to grow and continue growing. So it was good that she was part of this movement and to see that side of the movement, and hear what she had to offer. She she was gonna do the 30 days, but she ended up in the hospital at 17 days. And of course, we don't want nobody to die from this. And she, we asked her to step back. We don't want you to hurt yourself and end up dead. So she was given antibiotics and fluids and all that stuff to help her bring her back to health. And as soon as she got back on her feet, she's still doing things, and this movement isn't gonna just die at the 30 days hunger strike. This movement is gonna continue to grow. The goal was to bring awareness and to educate the youth and the community on this problem. And now we just got to move forward and bring all these people now that know about this problem and see how we could make this a bigger, successful campaign.
Yeah, it's very inspiring. So, Adam, are there other growers like Providence's family who would like to go organic but are not being allowed to? I mean, what Omar, I'll let you take the floor.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's hard to say. We certainly are hearing that some of the growers don't want to transition because sometimes organic farming is a little bit harder. It takes a little more effort. And they've been so stuck in their ways, making plenty of money. And if they've kind of bought into this story that the pesticides are safe because they're legal, then they're not going to want to change. And sometimes, they don't live right by their fields. Most of the work is actually done by farm workers who are immigrants who are recruited here intentionally to work for these companies in these fields. And so they assume most of the workplace risk of dealing with the chemicals. And so there's old attitudes and old ways of doing business, and there's been excuses made. Well, if a grower doesn't want to go, but we don't find that to be an acceptable reason or excuse. And at the end of the day, Driscoll's at the top management is able to make changes. They can, since they determine the contracts, they could either rotate growers to different parcels. They do that already, or they have the big research team. They could also mandate that they go organic, and they're still going to make money. That's a decision for them to make. So that's the problem with some of the parcels in question around the city, is that if we know some of the growers don't want to change, but they can be made to change or moved.
So, Omar, if Providence family didn't want to use a certain pesticide, could they make that choice when growing for Driscoll's?
From what she told us is that they want to go organic. At least her family does, but Driscoll's makes it very hard for them to go organic. They don't have that choice, I guess, if you're asking me. From what she says, they want to, but they don't have that choice because Driscoll's has a certain way they want them to grow. She even said something about they do take dirt samples to make sure you're using the pesticides, and she even went as far as saying that they'll fly drones over the property to make sure you're doing what they ask. It's something that needs to change, especially near the schools. California, in our county, Santa Cruz County and Monterey County, we have the highest percentages of childhood cancer in our areas. There's a map we have that shows from Jacob's Heart, that shows throughout the state of California. They have pins for every child that suffers from cancer. And in our area, Santa Cruz County and Monterey County, we have the highest rate of childhood cancer. And we also know that that's connected with the pesticides. We have also organophosphates, one of the pesticides that's very dangerous, that shows that we have over, I think that it's like more than 50% of the women that are pregnant are being affected by this pesticide in our area. So, I mean, there's a lot of science and numbers that back up this movement, and it's been going on for way too long, way too long.
Yeah. The day that you ended your hunger strike, you had a public event, and a paper had just come out that you mentioned at that event that showed that because of Driscoll's pesticide use, specifically the organophosphorus pesticides, that use went up 26% in Monterey County, where Driscoll's berry production is located. And that's even after California banned the #1 organophosphorus pesticide, chlorpyrifos. And so everywhere else in California, organophosphorus pesticide use went down after chlorpyrifos was banned. But in Monterey County, it went up.
Yes. Yes, and you know, it's funny, that last day of of my hunger strike, I was staying at the hotel throughout my hunger strike, just so I could have a, private space to just process the hunger strike and be able to have peace and quiet. And I was after that news conference, I got back to my room, and there was a conference going on at the hotel, and I had gone up to the front desk for some reason, and I'm standing there, and I see all these growers walking out of all these executives and growers from, they had boxes of strawberries and all this other. So I just like looked, and I walked up to like two gentlemen, and I go, "Excuse me, are you guys growers? Do you guys, what kind of conference is this?" Because I was curious. I seen strawberries, and the guy that I was talking to didn't respond right away. And I asked, "Do you guys go use organic fields, or do you guys use pesticides?" And the guy that was standing next to the gentleman I was talking to goes, "This is Miles Ryder right here. He's the owner of Driscoll's."
What?
So I said, "You know what?" I go, "It's no coincidence that I I run into you today. My name is Omar Dieguez, and I'm on a hunger strike. I just finished it, and I'm sure you heard about it. I would love to sit down and talk to you. Can we set up in a meeting?" And he kind of like, told me, "We already talked to your people," and he just wasn't really receptive to continue the conversation. And so I didn't want to be pushy. I didn't want to get the wrong impression of me. But I said, I would love to sit down and continue this conversation with you sometime. And I asked him for his number, and he kind of like just shined me, went on with his day. But I told him, it's, the creator put us in our path. And I look forward to maybe in the future sitting down with you.
Wow, that's just wild that happened.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you about the spiritual experience of fasting, but I want to go through the whole Driscoll story first, but don't let me forget to ask you about that, because I think that's sort of the reason why those strange coincidences happen when you're engaged in a practice like fasting. But I want to go back to the problem of pesticides and go through the rest of the information from this paper that came out when you ended your hunger strike. In Monterey County, you were mentioning that 50% of women, when they're pregnant, are living within a kilometer of organophosphate pesticide use. And that's because of the berries, because of Driscoll's practices, and living within even a greater distance, 1 to 1.25 kilometers of organophosphate pesticide applications during pregnancy is linked to autism, spectrum disorder, reduced IQ, and altered brain activity in adolescence. The other things are noticed first in little kids, but it even impacts the older kids. Adam, do you want to add to what we know about the impact of the pesticides?
Yes, there's been multiple studies. A famous study from UC Berkeley called the Chamaco study that followed 500 women. I would think it was 500 pregnant women working in the fields and connected similar learning disabilities and birth defects with their children. A UCLA study talked about the drift problem from fumigant gases. There's a lot of toxic pesticides that are used. It's not just one. It's one or two. There's dozens. They use malathion, 1,3-dichloropropene, also known as telone, chloropicrin. And so in the past, there have been efforts to say, well, let's get rid of this pesticide. Let's get rid of methyl bromide. And that was all good. Then it was just replaced by something equally toxic. And so that's why we started Cora, because it's like, okay, we can talk about the problems and do studies forever on how people are being poisoned. We said, why don't we actually just start getting rid of these poisons in our environment? Why don't we have a movement that calls for organic and regenerative? And we use organic, even though there's a lot of debate about organic and the standard and whether it's being weakened. What's important about the standard is it's not just an opinion, it's legal. When Driscoll's grows organic berries, they are not using these toxic pesticides like they are in the conventional berries. And that's not just an opinion. That's by law when it's to be certified organic. So that's why we started our movement, because we were just sick and tired of playing this game with the state of California, the Department of Pesticide Regulation, which is very pro-pesticide. In fact, they've been trying to increase the amounts of some of the telone concentrations they can use. It's almost like they're doing that just to give the companies legal cover. So we're sick of these games. We're sick of all these pesticides. And that's why we started this movement. Because we see these health problems. Omar mentioned Santa Cruz County. So, Watsonville's right on the border of Santa Cruz and Monterey County. It's right on the border, both. It has the second highest childhood cancer rate in the state of California. And we have we have a nonprofit here that's sole job is to help these families. And they usually take them to Stanford Medical Center where they can get the kind of sophisticated care that they actually need. And the doctors are saying, yeah, there's a growing problem here in Santa Cruz and Monterey counties. And so really we feel it's time to work towards the solutions. And that's more organic and more regenerative farming. And like I said, the fields we identified on the map we put together, which is on our website at farmworkerfamily.org/Cora, you can see that map. We're talking about 13 fields around the city. It's very, very modest. Of course, we want the whole valley to go organic. We want the whole state, country, but we're asking for a very reasonable and modest start. And even that is taking quite a big effort, because I believe that these companies don't want to change, and they also don't want to have to deal with public pressure. I think it's partially an ego thing where what a shame it would be for them to have to be more responsive to their community. But this campaign, these efforts are having an impact. These companies are run by human beings, and they do care about their image as well. And that's why all this attention and efforts are important, and will hopefully pay off. It's just a matter of time.
I want to mention, there's one of the things that and that's the part of the big reason that I started this hunger strike, was seeing that map and how many schools are being exposed to the pesticides, and some of these schools, the fields are literally divided by a chain link fence. On one side there's a playground, the other side there's a field where they're spraying pesticides. It's not even, you're literally, a fence is just dividing them, and they're using these toxic pesticides. But I've done work with Safe Ag, Safe Schools, SAS, and the Future Leaders. They have a youth group called the Future Leaders. They worked for this app, this website called Spray Days. They fought for this website to be put up, which Spray Days gives you notifications every single time that pesticides are being sprayed. And I punched in, you can punch in up to 10 different addresses. And I punched in Ohlone School because my backyard where I used to live was a loaning school, and that's one of the schools that is mostly affected by pesticides. And when I punched in this address, I started getting notifications right away. In a month, I'm not lying, I've gotten close to 60 to 50 notifications of them spraying pesticides, sometimes 2 to 3 times a day. So, when I talk about to people and give presentations, I try to tell people sign up for this app. If you don't believe it, sign up for this app. If you punch in an address that's near a field and you'll start getting those notifications, you will be alarmed how many times you'll get those notifications. I get those notifications on my email and on my cell phone text, and I can't keep up with them sometimes. There's so many, and it'll tell you what pesticides they're spraying at what time, and it'll give you an idea of what field. So I mean, I think that's going to be a big part of this educating the public. Like, sign up for this and get those notifications. If you don't believe me, look, get these notifications. You will be alarmed how many times they're doing this, and you know, it's alarming. It's alarming.
Yeah, that is shocking. The rule in California is that they can't do pesticide spraying within a half mile, right? That's the rule?
That's the rule. That should be the rule. That is not the rule. The rule is that there are timing restrictions when they can use the pesticides. They are allowed to use the pesticides right next to schools and neighborhoods. They just can't do it while school is in session. So they can do it after 6 p.m. And oftentimes they spray them at night. Now, some of the gases last 72 hours. And even if school's not in session, sometimes the families live right by the school, or there's a senior village. Yeah, this is the real California. This is the power of the ag lobby in California. It's not, unfortunately, much better than what's going on at the federal level. And so, yeah, these and it's not, and some of the notifications that Omar just talked about, they cover some of the pesticides. They don't even cover all of them. One company, one of the Driscoll's growers, when they submit a list of things they may use in a given year to a school, they don't say when and where exactly. There's like 80 to 100 pesticides on that list.
And one of the schools, Bradley School, sits right across the street from a testing facility where they test the pesticides. It's literally across the street from this testing facility that Driscoll owns. And one day I was driving by a field, and which is near Parham Middle School, and they were spraying pesticides. It was right before sundown. So I pulled over and I started taking pictures and video. And as soon as they seen that I was doing that, a truck tried to block me. And so they had two trucks out there, tractors spraying. They were crossing each other, and there was another one getting filled with pesticides to go out there to join these tractors. And I had the pictures. When they spray those pesticides, they hit the ground, but a lot of it gets kicked back up. And we live near the coast, so the wind takes a lot of those pesticides into the community, near our schools. We know that when they spray the pesticides, it stays up in the air up to 3 days, and they could travel up to a 7-mile radius. Watsonville is about 10 miles radius, big. So just imagine that. It's not only going to the nearby buildings, but it's hitting all of Watsonville when they spray these pesticides. And not only that, but it's contaminating our water. It's contaminating our drinking. Our air. And some of the studies that I found, and I've learned a lot throughout my hunger strike. It's even affecting wildlife. We have the monarch butterflies that come to Santa Cruz every year. And they're immigrants. They come from Mexico, and that monarch butterfly population has decreased because they found high levels of pesticides in them. They found high levels of pesticides in the oceans, in the marine life. So this is a bigger problem. It's not only a people problem, it's a Mother Earth problem, it's a wildlife problem. you know, it needs to be. We need to make change soon, soon, because as we all know, if we don't take care of Mother Earth and we don't take care of our farm workers, who, in my opinion, are the hardest working people in the country. uh, People say they're taking jobs from us, and but I would love to see people come out to the fields and replace them. I don't think anybody's going to come out to do the hard work that they do. And one of the things that I point out to the kids is, when I took those pictures of them spraying these pesticides, I was curious to see if farm workers were going to be out in those fields the next morning. So I went back out there in the morning, and they were out there in full force working. And one of the things that I tell the kids, if you're out there picking, if you've seen a farm worker out there working, when they work, they fully covered their body from head to toe, bandana to protect themselves from the exposure to pesticides, from the sun. And when they're out there picking, they're rubbing up against these plants. When they're done with their work day and they go home, who's the first person that runs up to them to give them a hug? It's their kids, their babies. And that's just like a good example of, like, that's how these pesticides are being transferred. I've talked to farm workers that say they take an extra pair of clothes to the fields and they keep it in their car. And at the end of the day of their work day, they also carry a gallon of water, and they kind of like give themselves a little rinse, you know, and they put on the extra set of clothes and they dispose of those clothes because they're afraid of taking those pesticides home to their families. So doing this hunger strike, it wasn't only about the pesticides, but it was also about the dignity and showing respect to our farm workers who work hard to provide food for everybody in the country. It's not just a local thing, it's for everybody. Next time you sit down and you pick up a strawberry, or you pick up a fork and you dip into that lettuce or any vegetable, think about those farm workers that provided that food, because ain't nobody gonna go out there and do that hard work that they do.
Yeah, and I think that the companies figured out a long time ago that it's better for them to have workers that don't have as many legal rights in the United States. So if they can use workers who are not citizens or don't have full citizenship and aren't protected by the law, they take advantage of that, and it's become just their business model. And I think that's probably the companies that benefit from immigrant labor who are the biggest obstacle to changing our immigration and labor laws to protect immigrants, because they're getting the benefit. Yeah, it's terrible. I do want to go back a little bit to the history of the labor movement's efforts against Driscoll. This has gone on for many years. I mean, the farm worker labor movement has been working on pretty much the same causes for many decades, but Driscoll specifically has been the subject of a longstanding dispute starting most recently in 2015. Tens of thousands of Driscoll's farm workers from Washington State down to Mexico were on strike against Driscoll's starting in 2015. And the way Driscoll's dealt with that, they gave one union contract on one farm in Washington State, and then they greenwashed themselves by getting fair trade certified with the great big fair trade company. We always support equal exchange for fair trade, but Driscoll's decided to go with the greenwashing fair trade organization and the it very minimal worker protections under this. So it seems like Driscoll's has tried to weasel out of really dealing with their workers through union contracts, which is really the only way that the workers get a chance to sit down and negotiate the conditions of their work. Adam, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Alexis. That Dolores Huerta, when Cora invited her, and we were honored to have her in Watsonville in May, and she spoke about that a little bit, how Driscoll's had been very problematic in the past, and the importance of having labor unions in ag, which has been very, very challenging. And you're absolutely right when you talked about the system of these ag companies recruiting and taking advantage of immigrants. It is by design. It's not an accident. It has been going on for a long time, and it makes it very hard to change things. And on top of that, when you have a president talking about deportation, it makes the population very fearful. I don't personally believe very many of the farm workers will be deported because much of the ag guys have connections to the president and the administration. And it's even, if you think about it that way, it's even more cruel because the families still live in fear. They have to deal with that kind of fear. But they are here. They were recruited to essentially make money for these companies. That's what's really going on in this system. And it's sad how, while there's been some progress, and there's most of the farm workers are dealing with a lot of these same stresses, and the cost of living is higher than ever in the California coast. You know, my grandfather was a farm worker, was here in Watsonville in the 50s, and then settled in the Central Valley. California was much cheaper back then, and now we have some of the highest costs of living anywhere in the country. Santa Cruz County, the statistics say we're the least affordable county in the United States. You look at the median income compared to the cost of living, given our proximity to the Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. The salaries have never been that high here, and the farm workers are overcrowding 2-3 families in an apartment sometimes just to make ends meet. So yes. So back to your original point, though. The labor conditions have been very, very difficult. I think, let me see what you were also asking me. Did I answer your question, or there's another part that I missed?
No, that was great. It's worth, we can't get into all of the details of what the workers who have worked for Driscoll have complained about, but it's everything from, wage theft to rape.
There's one more thing I wanted to add, Alexis, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. One of the things that Driscoll's has done to help them ward off any unionization is they've done more and more what's age-old term called sharecropping. So more and more of the growers, the contract growers, actually are of Mexican heritage now. The growers they're not all treated the same. However, they have the good old boys, and then they have newer growers. And they even have newer partners. Some of them have Mexican backgrounds as well in the top of the company. And so if they can diversify their middle management and upper management just a little bit, that's been also a way for them, I think, to diffuse any organizing movements. But it doesn't get away from these fundamental problems. It does not solve, in fact, intended not to solve the labor and environmental injustices. Just wanted to say that.
Yeah, very important. Yeah, this isn't just about pesticides, and this is not an easily dealt with issue. I mean, it would be easy for the companies if they cared at all. They could do it. But yeah, as Driscoll's continues to grow, being a multinational company, working in Mexico with the elite, with the landholders, they get more and more entrenched. So I do want to ask you, Omar, about your personal experience of fasting, the connections that you made with other activists who have used fasting as a strategy, hunger strike as a strategy, and your spiritual experience in this month-long hunger strike that you did.
Yeah, when I prepared for this hunger strike, it wasn't something that I just prepared from one night to the other. I talked about it for 6 months. I prepared for it for 6 months before I actually did it. I did a lot of research on on fasting. I've met other people that fasted in prison, that have fasted for other causes, and I've spoke to children, because some of them are no longer here, about how their father did this hunger strike when they did it. So I did a lot of research, but part of that was also um, mentally and spiritually preparing myself for this. Uh, Prayer is a big thing in my life, and when I began to prep for this hunger strike, I really dove deep into my prayer. Through indigenous ceremonies, I did a lot of sweat lodges. I would go out to nature and pray. Put my hand on a tree and pray and just feel the energy of Mother Earth and preparing for this. Um, so I did a lot of soul searching. Um, Before I started my hunger strike, there was something that was weighing heavy on me, uh, something personal. And before I went on to this hunger strike, I had to deal with that personal thing, uh, and deal with it before I did this hunger strike, because I didn't want to carry that with me throughout this hunger strike. Um, but during the hunger strike, it was super powerful to have many people come up to me and say thank you for what you're doing. Uh, they would say things like, my parents, my mom died from pesticides, my dad died to pesticides. I have to drive my children to Stanford to get treatment because of pesticides. So, just hearing all that was very motivating and spiritual for me. Hearing the pain, seeing the pain that my community is suffering. I would give presentations. Some students would come up after me class, after the presentation, and privately share, how they were being affected by pesticides or how they lost somebody, and being able to share tears with them was very touching. And I would always tell them, you don't have to carry that with you no more. You know, I'm gonna take it with me now. Thank you for sharing that. And there was a lot of moments throughout the hunger strike where I struggled, where I wanted to just eat sometimes. I wanted it to be over. And in those moments, I had to sit alone and process it and just pray, to get through it. So yeah, it was very spiritual in many different ways, and very, very humbled to experience this and to take those stories with me.
Yeah, that's a very beautiful thing that you did for people, lifting their burden and taking it as your own and processing it this way in this extreme act of fasting and a hunger strike. It's very beautiful and inspiring and touching. So thank you for doing this, and thank you for sharing your experience. So, wow. So thank you, Omar. Thank you, Adam. Quite amazing work that you are all doing under really challenging circumstances. It's an emergency where you live, and it is taking lives on a daily basis. And the least that people like me and our listeners can do is be conscientious about what we buy, to speak out, to let other people know about what you all are up to with the campaign for organic and regenerative agriculture. I am very inspired that you all have chosen not to do the one pesticide at a time whack-a-mole, which I must admit, Organic Consumers Association, that's what we do. We say ban this, ban that. You want to speak up on that, Omar?
No, I mean, the only thing I wanted to add was that the goal of this hunger strike was to bring awareness and education to the community. Now, the next part to this is bringing all the community together. And one thing that I would tell the students is like, don't give up on your dreams. Don't give up on something that you believe in. Many times I've been told, "Oh no, you can't do this." And my attitude was always, when people would tell me I can't, tell me I can't. I'll show you I can. Go after your goals, go after your dreams, make a difference, be kind to others. Because right now we're going through a lot in this country. A lot. There's a lot. There's so many battles to fight. But if you don't know where to start off with being kind to others. Start there, and then pursue your goals and dreams. We can make a difference. We can stop the pesticides. I'm not going to stop until I see the change.